Well, we have a lot to talk about, ladies and gentlemen. A lot happened today that will be changing fantasy football rankings and how we submit our starting lineups going forward. And the first thing that I want to get out of the way is I owe you a massive apology. I ranked Drake London as a top 24 wide receiver this week. I thought that he was the alpha target in Atlanta, and he was going to get every single wide receiver target in this wide receiver core. Well, that was not the case. While Drake London played more snaps than anybody else in this offense, while Drake London ran more routes than anybody not named Kyle Pitts, Drake London saw one target. And the Atlanta Falcons passing offense literally is non-existent. Like, London ran 20 routes. Kyle Pitts ran 20 routes today. We go over and we look at another offense just in that same game, just as a general baseline. If we look across the field, the Carolina Panthers had Terrace Marshall run 40 routes. Jonathan Mingo run 39. Adam Thielen run 38. It looks like the Atlanta Falcons are not running an offense that will provide fantasy football value for any pass catcher, particularly at wide receiver, and Drake London is not startable. Now, with this being said, I still think you can start Kyle Pitts. The reason being is because the overall bar for a tight end to get into your starting lineup obviously is going to be so much lower than wide receiver. So still not as excited about Kyle Pitts as we were previously, but nonetheless, he's still probably going to be someone that we're starting just because tight end is so damn gross. Now, going over to the running backs, y'all know I am all in on my guy, Bijan Robinson, hook 'em horns, not to mention Texas took down Bama, but nonetheless, he looked great. I mean, in the open field, goes out there and scores, in my mind, one of the most impressive touchdowns from today. It does not stop Tyler Algier from making an impact. I mean, if you're looking at these splits, Bijan Robinson, 32 total snaps. Tyler Algier, 28 total snaps in this offense. They split pretty much 50-50. If you look at the carries in this offense, Tyler Algier, 15 carries in comparison to Bijan Robinson at 10. Algier came away with 75 rushing yards and multiple rushing touchdowns as well. Now, with this being said, Bijan Robinson did have every snap in the 2-minute drill. With this being said, he was the primary third down back as well. So how I'm going to be viewing this is Bijan Robinson is still a must-start top 10 running back every single week in full PPR formats. But y'all know we ranked him coming into the season at RB2, only behind Christian McCaffrey. Well, until further notice, he'll stay about running back 8, running back 7 in our weekly rankings where we had him for week 1 because we know typically rookies start slow and build on their season as we get closer to the fantasy football playoffs. Now, going over to the Carolina side of things, Miles Sanders is not a 3-down running back, ladies and gentlemen. I thought Carolina would be bad. I thought Miles Sanders would still be a good option, though, because he was going to get every touch out of this backfield. Well, that's not the case. I mean, hell, Chubb went out there and had 28 snaps. Miles Sanders had 44. If you're going to look at these splits, most concerningly, you had Chubb with all 8 third down snaps in comparison to Miles Sanders at 0. Now, I'm getting all these charts and all this data from PFF, ladies and gentlemen. Now, going over to the raw box score, you had Sanders still going out there and getting you 17 rushing yards. He still had 4 receptions and 28 receiving yards. So it wasn't like he was just horrendous from a fantasy perspective, but this was a great matchup for him. The Carolina Panthers, in the majority of games that they play, will be losing. And if Miles Sanders is not out there on third down, it's not a great spot to be in. He is going to be someone that has to drop in our rankings. Now, a similar spot, I thought Dameon Pierce would be viable. Of course, not this week. This week we knew it was a tough matchup against the Baltimore Ravens. But I thought, okay, well, Dameon Pierce may be in a very bad offense, but ultimately is going to get every single touch in this bad offense. Well, that's not the case. Dameon Pierce was in a 3-man running back by committee. You had Dameon Pierce, 36 snaps. You had Mike Boone, 25. You had Devin Singletary, 16. I don't know where we start Dameon Pierce now. Has to be a pretty damn good matchup. I mean, ultimately, he only had 3 targets out of this backfield as well. Whenever CJ Stroud had 44 pass attempts, 3 targets is not going to cut it. That's like an 8% team target share. Now, going over to what we have with the opposite side of the ball, I don't want to talk about the J.K. Dobbins injury just yet. Does suck. I know a lot of us started J.K. Dobbins today because it was a great matchup. I will be talking about the running backs to pick up in the waiver wire video tomorrow. And of course, side note, if you're not subscribed to the channel, we're going to be running through the waiver wire tomorrow. We'll be still live streaming every single night this season. Don't you worry. We're going to be here to help you out. So yeah, subscribe, drop a like on this video if you haven't already. And also, if y'all want to go check out any of these pick'ems on Underdog Fantasy for tomorrow night's game, would definitely recommend that out. I mean, if I'm going to be looking at my favorite pick'em on Underdog right now, specifically for what we have on Monday night, I'm going to be looking at James Cook to have more receiving yards than Breece Hall. But also make sure you pair this with the free Josh Allen special pick'em that we got, everybody. And yeah, make sure you use promo code FLOCK, link down there in the description and comment section. Flock's going to give you a 100% deposit match up to $200, our 2023 fantasy football rankings, and an additional mystery pick'em for anybody new on Underdog Fantasy. But now going over to Cincinnati, I understand everybody's going to panic, right? And yes, Joe Burrow was bad. Joe Burrow was horrible. Joe Burrow had arguably the worst performance of any quarterback in the NFL this week. 14 completions off of 31 attempts, 82 passing yards, and 0 touchdowns. This led to Jamar Chase disappointing. This led to a 0-point performance from T. Higgins. Now, the fundamental question is what we've seen from Joe Burrow over the past 3 years a lie? Is it? Of course not. Of course, Joe Burrow is still one of the best quarterbacks in the NFL. Ultimately, at the end of the day, Joe Burrow just wasn't at the preseason, wasn't at training camp, had been dealing with this calf injury, knocking a little bit of rust off here. If you can buy low on a player like T. Higgins because of this game where he still had 8 targets, we're going to go ahead and do it. I don't think that Joe Burrow turned all of a sudden into a pumpkin, and we're going to have to deal with this rest of the season. Any given Sunday, anything crazy can happen. That's what makes football football, and this is one of those instances. Now, we do have a takeaway over on the Cleveland side of things where Nick Chubb crushed. Classic Nick Chubb game. He goes out there and he has 18 carries, 106 rushing yards, but also in classic Nick Chubb fashion, he was not the running back used on third downs. He was not the running back used on obvious passing downs. That was Jerome Ford. Jerome Ford did step into the Kareem Hunt role. Jerome Ford had 9 snaps on third down in comparison to Nick Chubb only at 3. So please, if Jerome Ford's on your waiver wire, go out there and pick him up. And don't think Nick Chubb's all of a sudden a top 3 running back because there's no Kareem Hunt. I mean, these Kareem Hunt touches aren't going to Nick Chubb, at least at the moment. Now, going over to Jacksonville, one thing that I am terrified about, ladies and gentlemen, you know that Calvin Ridley went at the end of the second round, the beginning of the third round of pretty much every single underdog draft this offseason. And at that price, I thought it was rich. At that price, I was taking T. Higgins, who scored 0 points today, Devonta Smith, who did okay, but still. Calvin Ridley is back. Calvin Ridley has not lost anything. It was like 684 days since Calvin Ridley played a football game. He goes out there in like the first half, 11 targets, 8 receptions, 101 receiving yards. Ridley looks like a borderline locked and loaded top 5 wide receiver going forward. Now, with this also being said, Christian Kirk is dust. For the love of God, do not start Christian Kirk until we see otherwise. We talked about this in the preseason. This is one of the reasons why I actually have a ton of Zay Jones, which I do feel good about. But Calvin Ridley and Zay Jones were in 2 wide receiver sets. Christian Kirk is an exclusive slot wide receiver now. Christian Kirk's not startable regardless of if it's full PPR, non-PPR. We get this graph from PFF, but if you look at the trend in Christian Kirk's snap rate, I mean, it is a clear drop-off with the addition of Calvin Ridley here. And if Ridley's going to be a target hog, it's impossible to rely on Kirk. Now, going over to the other side of the ball, Anthony Richardson looks great, ladies and gentlemen. The Anthony Richardson breakout is already upon us, where he goes out there, he has the 40 rushing yards and the rushing touchdown, which we were looking for. And that's why we were drafting Richardson a lot. We knew the rushing upside was there. And we were actually taking a lot of Michael Pittman Jr., feeling dumb about it because people are telling us we were dumb. But nonetheless, Anthony Richardson can surprisingly throw the ball. I mean, we have Michael Pittman Jr. out there, 11 targets, 8 receptions, almost 100 receiving yards, and the receiving touchdown. Very encouraging. I think that Michael Pittman Jr. is going to be a borderline top 24 wide receiver in our rankings from here on out. Of course, we'll see what happens next week. But I mean, if you're a Colts fan, I understand that you lose. It was a very tough matchup. I think you should be pumped about what you saw today. Side note, Deion Jackson did get every snap. Deion Jackson was the full-blown starting running back here, and ultimately it didn't matter. 13 carries, 14 rushing yards. This guy's a bum. Now, going over to our next spot, I was worried about starting Michael Thomas week 1. I said, Michael Thomas has not been productive since 2019. Let's root for him. He has a lot of upside. Keep him on the bench, and we will start him after we see him. Well, Thomas looked good, ladies and gentlemen. Started the game off super hot. Of course, Olave is still him. Olave is still the guy. But Thomas did have 8 targets, 5 receptions, and 61 receiving yards. I'm very sorry if I told you to start Jamal Williams, who did get every touch out of this backfield, but the rushing offense was just horrendous nonetheless. And yeah, it looks like Michael Thomas is also that borderline top 24, top 30 wide receiver, and will be in our rankings going forward. Now, going over to Tennessee, Derrick Henry is in an interesting spot. Now, of course, this was one of the nastiest games you could ever imagine. The Titans were never truly in it, considering the fact that Ryan Tannehill goes 16 for 34, 198 passing yards, 0 touchdowns, and 3 interceptions. Tannehill looked hideous. We need either Levis, we need Willis in here. I mean, at this point, we kind of know who Tannehill is. The Titans really can't win with Tannehill. And what's also very interesting is you saw more snaps played by Tajay Spears this week than Derrick Henry. Now, with this being said, Derrick Henry still ended up seeing more volume. He had 15 carries compared to Spears at 3. You still saw way more production. Derrick Henry still gave you about 120 yards compared to Tajay Spears at about 28. But yeah, Derrick Henry doesn't look like a full-blown workhorse running back. At least he didn't this week. Of course, we'll continue to monitor this. It wouldn't be that surprising, though. Derrick Henry's 30 years old. Do you really want him out there in every single snap? Now, going over to Washington, I knew Bijan Robinson was a must-start guy because of the great matchup that you had going up against the Arizona Cardinals, but I didn't know it was going to be this extreme. You had Bijan Robinson 19 carries in comparison to Antonio Gibson at 3. So what they've decided to do, and this was what everybody was talking about going into the season, there were 2 options. One, Bijan Robinson and Antonio Gibson maintain their same roles, and Antonio Gibson got the receiving down work from J.D. McKissic. Or Bijan Robinson kind of took both their roles and cast Antonio Gibson into the J.D. McKissic spot, where it looks like, Antonio Gibson is kind of J.D. McKissic at this point. He played a lot of snaps. He ran a considerable amount of routes. But ultimately, at the end of the day, Bijan Robinson's the guy that went out there and produced. Bijan Robinson just continued to play more and more snaps in this offense. And yeah, anytime that you think Washington's going to win the game, you probably should start him. Now, going over to San Fran, I was very worried about starting any of the receivers, both on the Pittsburgh and the 49ers side, because if you looked at Las Vegas win totals, it was supposed to be a game that was dominated by defense. And yeah, the 49ers defense dominated, but so did their offense. And Brandon Ayuk, 8 receptions off of 8 targets, 129 receiving yards, multiple receiving touchdowns while looking phenomenal doing so. Brandon Ayuk going out there and absolutely crushing. Definitely a must-start wide receiver going forward. We were way too low on him in our rankings. And looking at the running back, what's also very interesting is Christian McCaffrey is not a Kyle Shanahan running back. We thought CMC's usage at the end of last season was going to continue over to this year. And no, it looks like they have fully implemented Christian McCaffrey into this offense. And the CMC usage is similar to what you had with 2019 Christian McCaffrey. Yeah, the 2019 Christian McCaffrey that averaged 150 total yards per game in the Carolina Panthers offense. He goes out there and he has 152 rushing yards, a rushing touchdown. He sees 5 targets out of this backfield. But most importantly, he sees 58 total snaps. Elijah Mitchell only gets 10. This is a blowout game. The Pittsburgh Steelers were never in this. I wonder how long they're going to continue to use Christian McCaffrey in this way. I would assume in blowouts they get Mitchell in at the end. Like, why are we not going to save CMC when this is obviously, a team that is at least expecting to be Super Bowl bound? Now, going over to Tampa, I was very worried about Rachaad White because they're in this offense that he was playing in. But honestly, Rachaad White had a great game. Now, obviously, he didn't score a lot of fantasy points. 39 rushing yards, 10 receiving yards. Yeah, if you started White, you were disappointed. And we didn't even rank Rachaad White inside our top 30 running backs this week. And I'm kind of happy we did. But going forward, he will be. Because ultimately, at the end of the day, if we go through and look at the underlying usage, Rachaad White played 52 snaps. The next best guy here was Sean Tucker at 8. Rachaad White saw pretty much every single third down. Every single early. Rachaad White was the 3-down running back. Rachaad White was the workhorse back here in Tampa. Very surprising. Obviously, still a very bad offense, and there's not a lot of production to go around. But nonetheless, from what you got today with Rachaad White, I know the points weren't there, but I'm actually higher on him than I was previously. You know, we were screaming to sell him. Now, going over to Minnesota, yeah, Vikings are going to air it out. The Minnesota Vikings are in play, ladies and gentlemen, to lead the NFL in pass attempts. You get 44 attempts from Cousins this week. You have 12 targets for Jefferson, who obviously crushes. He's Justin Jefferson. You have 6 targets for Addison. I mean, Addison looked great. Yeah, the receiving touchdown. Then going forward, Addison is in consideration for your starting lineup. And then you had TJ Hawkinson with 9 targets as well. So it looks like the majority of targets will be funneled between these 3 names. You did have KJ Osborne mixed in a bit. I expect that you see more and more Jordan Addison, less and less KJ Osborne as the season goes on. And that's ultimately is what's going to turn Jordan Addison into that top 24 wide receiver, someone that you have to start every single week. Now, going over to Miami, there's not much to discuss. This was one of those games where Tyreek blew everything up. If you went up against Tyreek, especially in a low-scoring week overall, I mean, GG, RIP, you had no shot. Tyreek Hill, 11 receptions, 215 receiving yards, 2 receiving touchdowns, and 15 targets overall. Now, going forward, ultimately, the question is, okay, what does this mean? What kind of usage should we... Is he the wide receiver 1 overall in fantasy? I don't know. I'm still going to go with Justin Jefferson there. But I would love to know what your thoughts are. Like, is there any world where we can have Tyreek Hill behind Jamar Chase now? Now, in this game, I mean, we knew the Chargers wide receivers were going to produce, at least we thought they were, because apparently the Chargers can now run the ball. Something we haven't really seen in the past. The Chargers going out there and having 40 total rush attempts, 234 total rushing yards, 3 rushing touchdowns. Now, obviously, Eckler looked great. I mean, we knew that was going to happen. I mean, particularly as a receiver. But Joshua Kelly's getting involved here. Joshua Kelly sees the same amount of carries as Austin Eckler. Gets the rushing touchdown as well. Looks like a great best ball option. We'll definitely talk about him a little bit more in our waiver wire video tomorrow morning. But yeah, I think you can be excited about the Los Angeles Chargers rushing attack. And Joshua Kelly's a must roster guy, not must start. Now, going over to the Bears, I mean, we said to avoid DJ Moore. We said this was still going to be a very, very bad passing offense, even if they were much improved. And this was about the most passing volume we've ever had from Justin Fields. Fields has 37 passing attempts. Let me go ahead and pull up the Justin Fields game log from last year to see if he had this many passing attempts at any point last season. Because honestly, I doubt it. Justin Fields also had 59 rushing yards, so Fields will continue to be an effective player in fantasy based off of rushing. But outside of that, nobody is startable here in Chicago. They split the running back backfield. You get a little bit of Herbert. You get a little bit of Roschon. You get a little bit of Deonta Foreman. If you're taking a small pie, and I guess splitting it 4 ways if you want to count Justin Fields, there's just no shot. And what's an interesting side note is, yeah, the most passing attempts Fields saw in a game last year was 28. Comparison to 37 this year. Even if they're going to let him air it out with DJ Moore here, just, I don't know. You can't start any of these Bears pass catchers. Now, on the other end of the spectrum, the Packers look damn good. I don't know if we want to be starting Romeo Doubs, Jaden Reed, Luke Musgrave going forward. I mean, everything is super dispersed in this offense. Outside of Aaron Jones, who was dealing with a little bit of a hamstring injury. Of course, we'll keep you posted on that this week. But once Christian Watson comes back in, I'm confident that Watson was going to crush. I love Watson, the talent. Really, our only hesitation was saying we didn't know what to expect with Jordan Love. I didn't know if Love was going to be any good. It looks like Jordan Love is good, ladies and gentlemen. I'm excited about Christian Watson. I think he's going to be a buy low candidate this week. Now, going over to the Rams, I thought Puka didn't have the upside to move the needle. I thought that Puka was someone that you couldn't consider starting. And hell, I believe his underdog pick him on the week was like 23 receiving yards. He goes out there, 10 receptions, 15 targets, 119 receiving yards, ladies and gentlemen. I don't want to say he's a must-start guy. 100% he's going to be the top waiver wire pickup out wide receiver in particular. And until Cup comes back, it looks like he's getting volume. And staying in this offense, what's very interesting to see is, y'all know we were having a hard fade with Akers, saying that Cam Akers is an immediate sell. He's never been productive in fantasy football. It's going to be one of the worst offenses in the NFL, and there were going to be no running back points to be scored. Well, we were wrong. There are running backs points to be scored, but those points are going to be scored by Kyren Williams. Kyren Williams, 2 rushing touchdowns. Cam Akers sees the majority of the work. Cam Akers only has 29 rushing yards on 22 rushing attempts. I know everybody's spazzing saying, oh, Sean Payton hates Cam Akers. Sean Payton hates. Guys, he gave him 22 attempts. What do you want to see? Cam Akers gave you 29 rushing yards. Nonetheless, I think that it's going to be hard to start any of these Rams backs. And Kyren Williams definitely is someone that you need to pick up. But, if all this work went to Akers, of course, Akers would have crushed and I would have had egg all over my face. Now, going over to Seattle, Geno Smith had 112 passing yards this week, ladies and gentlemen. You have a healthy Metcalf. You have a healthy Kenneth Walker. You have JSN. You have Tyler Lockett. Metcalf looked like he was going to be great coming out the gate. But yeah, eventually, this offense has to turn around if any of these guys are going to be viable. You have so many weapons here that if all of a sudden you're in a spot where, they're all taking a slice of a tiny, tiny pie, nobody's going to get enough to eat for anybody to be viable in fantasy. Now with the Giants, I'm recording this about halftime. Daniel Jones looks like absolute buns. Obviously, the weather's bad. I will go ahead. We'll update you with tomorrow with what happens with this Cowboys and Giants game. And of course, we will be live tomorrow after Josh Allen plays the New York Jets. Highly recommend you pair your Josh Allen special pick'em more than less than half a passing yard with the James Cook more receiving yards than Breece Hall this week. Of course, you can find that link in the description, in the comment section. Promo code FLOCK on Underdog Fantasy is going to get you a 100% deposit match up to $200, plus our 2023 fantasy football rankings. And if you are new to Underdog, you're also going to get an additional mystery pick'em on top of that. So please make sure you are taking advantage. But I think that's all I have for you. I really do appreciate you. Really hope you have a great day. But actually, real quick before I leave you, we do have a job opening at Flock Fantasy. I know a lot of y'all wanted to work with the Flock before. Don't think this is going to be to make fantasy football videos or anything. No. This is going to be a web developer, a data engineer. This is going to be someone to help us make fantasy football tools for flockfantasy.com. So if you're interested, please reach out to me. This contact, these are kind of the things that we are looking for. But thank you again, ladies and gentlemen. Really appreciate you. And really hope I get to see you in the live stream on Monday night.